In a world increasingly polarized by stark political ideologies and social divisions, how can we find a path toward meaningful dialogue and understanding? A podcast between Dr. Jordan Peterson and famous YouTuber Destiny sheds light on this question, while also addressing the differences between modern left and right political ideologies on the hot-button issues of governmental and corporate abuses of power, poverty, climate policies, and the COVID-19 pandemic response, among many other topics. Hello, and welcome to Wisdom Digest, where we aim to make wisdom more digestible. In today's video, I will be summarizing the discussions and main takeaways from this podcast. However, if you have the time, I highly recommend watching the full discussion linked in the description below. Destiny begins by sharing his background in streaming, starting around 15 years ago and transitioning from various platforms. He became politically popular due to his argumentative personality and debating right-wing figures. Peterson and Destiny discuss the usefulness of gaming and debating in shaping Destiny's political career. Destiny discusses his shift from gaming to political commentary, which began around 2016. He explains that his temperament, associated with masculine traits, contrasts with the more compassionate and feminine nature of modern leftist ideology. Destiny attributes his growing interest in politics to the low quality of conversation surrounding the 2016 election and his desire to improve the discourse. Initially a conservative, Destiny's political leanings evolved over time, moving towards libertarianism and eventually leading him to identify as a leftist. He built an audience among his gaming followers and expanded his reach to millions of viewers monthly. Currently, he has around 770,000 subscribers to his main YouTube channel and streams to 5,000 to 15,000 concurrent viewers daily. Destiny then discusses how his personal experiences led him to develop more sympathy for left-leaning ideas, specifically regarding income inequality and the role of government in providing basic necessities for people to take advantage of opportunities. He explains that while his core beliefs have not changed, the way that they are applied has, as he now sees the need for government intervention to ensure people have access to essential resources. Destiny broadens the discussion to compare and contrast the political viewpoints of the left and the right, with the left believing that the government can effectively redistribute taxes to those in need, and the right advocating for more community-based solutions. However, Destiny raises a concern about the potential for both government and corporate gigantism, which can lead to tyranny and the misuse of power. Peterson expresses his skepticism towards the left, particularly regarding their support for large corporations and government structures recently. He mentions the paradox of conservatives and leftists having opposing concerns about gigantism, but shares a common apathy towards it. Peterson is surprised at the left's shift in attitude towards pharmaceutical companies and their acceptance of large corporations during the COVID-19 pandemic. He also touches upon the current political landscape and the rise of populism among conservatives, with some similarities emerging between far left and MAGA Trump supporters in their distrust of both corporations and government. Peterson reflects on the idea that people's beliefs may not be rooted in principles, but rather influenced by social groups and external factors. The concept of gigantism as a concern may not be a genuine priority for some people, as it could be used as a proxy for other issues they dislike. Discussing his views on the redistribution of wealth and the role of the state in addressing poverty, Peterson argues that while relative poverty is a concern, attempts to fix it through state intervention can lead to an increase in absolute poverty. He also points out that the decrease in poverty since the collapse of the Soviet Union is due to the implementation of free market systems, which, while maintaining some level of inequality, have led to a significant reduction in absolute levels of privation. He identifies himself as a pro-capitalist, pro-free market individual, and clarifies that when he uses the term leftist, he refers to those who advocate for state-sponsored economic intervention as a solution to relative inequality. The discussion then shifts to the differences between redistribution for equality of opportunity and command economies. Peterson argues that Scandinavian countries, often used as examples of redistribution, have unique advantages due to their small size, ethnic homogeneity, and wealth. Peterson emphasized the importance of recognizing the benefits of both free market capitalism and government intervention to control negative externalities, which he refers to as mixed economies. He also touches on the challenges of avoiding the pitfalls of command economies and forced redistribution. The conversation then shifts to the topics of negative externalities and the role of a free market economy as a distributed computational device. Destiny discusses the limitations of centralized decision-making and computation in addressing complex externalities in a market economy. He argues that attempting to account for these externalities through heavy-handed interventions, such as price controls, can introduce new sets of externalities and create friction in the economy. Instead, he suggests a mixed economy approach where externalities are accounted for through government intervention, such as attaching a price to the externality, allowing the free market to function. However, Destiny expresses concern over the unintended consequences of carbon pricing, specifically the potential increase in absolute privation among the world's poorest populations. He argues that focusing on remedying absolute poverty and providing cheap energy could be the fastest route to a sustainable planet. Destiny criticizes interventionists for their belief that they can accurately calculate economic projections 1 century out. Destiny acknowledges the argument that government interventions such as carbon taxes disproportionately impact the poor. He admits this point but argues that it's not a strong enough argument on its own to determine moral appropriateness. Destiny uses an example of helping the homeless, who are disproportionately affected by their living conditions, while also supporting the incarceration of rapists and murderers. He emphasizes that just because an argument targets the poor does not automatically make it a bad thing. Instead, it depends on the severity of the impact and the potential outcomes. Destiny also questions the ability to accurately model economic and climate developments far in the future, making it difficult to predict the consequences of policies aimed at addressing these issues. Peterson engages in a debate about the accuracy of climate models and the potential impact of climate change. He argues that the climate models are not sufficiently accurate due to large margins of error and lack of resolution. He also questions the time frame used to evaluate climate fluctuations, stating that it is an intractable scientific problem. Peterson expresses skepticism about the predictions of climate apocalypse mongers and compares the issue to a person's weight fluctuations, emphasizing the importance of specifying the time frame. He also criticizes the focus on a utopian or anti-dystopian future and the potential impact on the poor, citing an increase in the number of people at risk for food privation. Peterson concludes by expressing concern that the current state of climate discussions and the potential consequences for the global population. Peterson discusses his skepticism towards climate policies and their impact on developing countries, specifically Africa. He argues that these countries are being denied the opportunity to pursue fossil fuel development due to policies from the organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. Peterson questions why renewable energy is being pushed instead, given its lack of energy density and environmental friendliness. He also criticizes the left for sacrificing the poor and de-industrializing, even at the nuclear level, despite the devastating consequences for the environment and the poor. Peterson expresses his confusion as to why the left supports such policies and wonders about their ultimate goal. He raises concerns about the potential for genocidal societies emerging with utopian visions and questions the left's anti-nuclear stance. Destiny then discusses the concept of belief systems and how they can hinder rational thinking and analysis. He explains that instead of building on moral or philosophical underpinnings, people often inherit a constellation of beliefs from societal groups, which forms a Jenga tower that can easily fall apart when one belief is challenged. Destiny expresses concern that this can prevent individuals from evaluating issues reasonably, using the example of climate change. He believes that some people's strong beliefs about the issue might inhibit them from taking a step back and thinking rationally about it. Destiny also mentions his own experience of having beliefs that don't align with his political ideology and how it can be challenging to evaluate policies while dealing with these associated beliefs. The discussion then revolves around the comparison between climate models and economic models, and the challenges of predicting climate change consequences. Peterson argues that economic models are not precise enough to calculate the impact of climate change over a long period, while climate models can provide an average temperature trend over a certain time frame. Peterson also acknowledges the advancements in renewable energy, particularly solar power, but raises concerns about their energy density, infrastructure requirements, variability, and the need for a reliable backup system. Peterson suggests that nuclear power could be a viable alternative to address the reliability issues while reducing carbon emissions. Peterson discusses the potential motivations behind political ideologies and the actions of those in power. He uses the example of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime to illustrate his point, suggesting that people may not be aware of the true driving forces behind their beliefs and actions. Peterson argues that while it's more likely that people are misinformed or misguided than intentionally trying to harm others, that malevolence is also a possibility. He questions the sincerity of those who claim to be acting in the best interests of the planet, using the historical example of Hitler to argue that the cover story may not be the true motivation. Peterson also compares this to conservative beliefs and actions, acknowledging that skepticism is warranted when people brandish the moral flag. Overall, Peterson encourages critical thinking and questioning the motivations of those in power. The speakers engage in a thoughtful conversation about the use and abuse of power, with a particular focus on the role of governments and corporations in limiting or enabling the imposition of central doctrines. They discuss the importance of institutional protections against the concentration of power, such as decentralized government, and the psychological and philosophical solutions to the tendency towards power seeking. They also touch upon the historical record of death tolls under leftist and rightist regimes, acknowledging the complexities and nuances of labeling political ideologies. The conversation then shifts to the Exodus biblical story as an analysis of the central tendency towards freedom from tyranny and slavery. Drawing an analogy from the biblical story of Moses and the Israelites, Peterson discusses the dangers of imposing radical doctrines and the use of force. Moses, who has spent his life leading the Israelites towards the Promised Land, uses force instead of persuasion when the Israelites are dying of thirst and ask him to intercede with God. As a result, Moses is barred from entering the Promised Land. Peterson emphasizes the importance of consent and the dangers of using force in political and philosophical contexts. He also highlights the need for open conversations and shared media landscapes to bridge the gap between different perspectives. Peterson expresses concern that the use of compulsion and force, particularly in the context of utopian ideals, can be exploited by power-hungry individuals. The speakers then discuss the historical context and current state of illegal immigration in the United States. Peterson acknowledges the historical average of 13 to 15 million illegal immigrants in the country, but notes that the variability over the last 20 years for illegal migration at the south border is between 300,000 and 1.2 million. The conversation then shifts to excess deaths in Europe, which are up about 20%. Peterson suggests that this could be a consequence of the disruption of the healthcare system due to the focus on the COVID-19 epidemic. He also mentions the increase in depression, anxiety, suicidality, and alcoholism as potential contributing factors. Concerns regarding the COVID-19 vaccines and their impact on transmission are discussed. Peterson argues that the vaccines were marketed as eliminating transmission, but in reality, they only reduced it. He also mentions the rise of myocarditis cases among young men and the low risk of COVID-19 death for young children. Peterson criticizes the government's messaging about vaccines and the transmission of the disease, stating that the vaccines were supposed to help by reducing hospitalization, death, and transmission. However, Peterson questions the data supporting the claim that vaccines eliminate transmission and points to recent studies that contradict this notion. Peterson also touches on the alliance between the progressive left and pharmaceutical companies and the potential moral hazard of relying too heavily on vaccines. The unexpected support for COVID-19 vaccines on the political left, despite their historical skepticism of big corporations and regulatory capture, is discussed. Peterson argues that the left's trust in institutions and governments led them to overlook potential risks associated with the new mRNA technology used in these vaccines. Peterson also emphasizes that the mass administration of an untested technology, despite its novelty, posed a significant danger and questions whether the potential harm outweighed the benefits. Destiny rebuts that if the vaccines had in fact caused excess deaths or other adverse effects, there would have been widespread criticism from various organizations and individuals around the world. However, Destiny also notes that there was a lack of credible opposition to the vaccines and questions why governments, academic institutions, and private companies did not raise concerns if the vaccines were indeed causing harm. Destiny also expresses skepticism towards the idea that there are unaccounted for deaths in excess in Europe that can only be explained by the vaccine. He argues that if there were billions of people experiencing measurable negative effects from the vaccine, it would be possible to ignore or cover up. He also criticizes the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, and questions its credibility. Destiny acknowledges that trust in third parties is necessary in daily life, but emphasizes the importance of evaluating evidence and data before forming conclusions. He also touches upon the use of force in politics and the controversy surrounding vaccine mandates. Overall, Peterson expresses a skeptical and critical stance towards the COVID-19 vaccines and the reporting systems used to evaluate their safety. Peterson discusses the concept of force and its relationship to vaccines and the use of force in society. He argues that requiring employees to get vaccinated qualifies as a type of force. even if it's not as extreme as a cop threatening to use deadly force. Peterson expresses skepticism towards the use of force in general, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 response. He believes that the necessity to use force is a sign of bad policy, and that most people are enticed into cooperative relationships rather than being forced into them. Peterson also touches on the definition of psychopathology and its relationship to short-term gratification and antisocial personality disorder. He suggests that both genetics and environment play a role in the development of psychopathic tendencies. In a discussion revolving around the concepts of psychopathy, addiction, and malevolence, Peterson explains that psychopathy involves a short-term orientation and a predatory or parasitical element, which is not present in all addictive behaviors. They also differentiate between malevolence driven by a desire for popularity and that driven by hatred, with the latter being considered worse. The conversation then shifts to the role of societal guardrails and the use of force in social structures, with the speakers debating whether negative punishments, such as withholding sex or expected rewards, can be considered as the use of force. They also touch upon the emotional consequences of disagreements within relationships and the potential impact on long-term relationships. The role of force in society and the concept of tit-for-tat systems as a form of justice is elaborated on. Peterson and Destiny agree that society cannot be built solely on force, as it would lead to too much friction and resistance. However, they acknowledge that there are certain situations where force may be necessary as a last resort. They also discuss the idea that some people may view force as justice, while others may see it as injustice. They delve into the concept of tit-for-tat systems, where force is used as a response to wrongdoing, with the goal of re-establishing cooperation as quickly as possible. They acknowledge that there are different types of tit-for-tat systems, and that some may be used more forgivingly than others. They touch on the idea that early childhood abuse may lead to criminality, and that some people may respond to environmental conditions in ways that lead to criminal behavior. They recognize that this is a complex issue and that there is no easy solution. Overall, Peterson and Destiny concur that force has a role to play in society, but it could be used sparingly and as a last resort. Peterson then discusses the relationship between poverty and criminality. Contrary to the common belief that poverty is a causative factor for criminal behavior, Peterson argues that the intergenerational transmission of violence dampens itself out, and most abused children do not become abusers. He points out that in areas of relative poverty, young men resort to violence to seek social status rather than out of economic necessity. Peterson emphasizes that the underlying motive for status-seeking crime is not economic redress, but the desire for comparative status. He acknowledges that while wealth inequality is a better predictor of crime than poverty, it is still primarily driven by status-seeking. He references crime and punishment and explains how committing a moral transgression and getting away with it can lead to profound self-disturbance. However, when just punishment is eventually given out, it can be a precondition for atonement and reintegration into society. Peterson also emphasizes the importance of considering the moral framework of different systems and the potential consequences of using force to enforce moral requirements. He criticizes the use of force to distribute vaccines as an ineffective and potentially harmful policy and encourages a more invitational strategy. Throughout the conversation, Destiny reflects on the importance of engaging in arguments and debates in the public sphere to pursue truth rather than just winning arguments. Finally, Destiny discusses the importance of engagement in a democratic society, despite differences in opinions or policies. He expresses concern over the increasing polarization and the formation of homogeneous bubbles, but admits that the data on this issue is not clear. Destiny argues that as the bubble becomes larger, people are expected to have similar beliefs regardless of their geographical location, leading to misunderstandings and potential conflicts. Destiny concludes by acknowledging the challenges of conversations and the potential pain they may cause, but stresses that it's a better alternative to physical combat or disengagement. To answer the question posed at the beginning of this video, perhaps the key lies not in silencing the other side, but in embracing the complexity of human experience. By engaging in open, thoughtful conversations that bridge the divide between contrasting viewpoints, we can uncover shared values and find common ground. It's through this mutual respect and willingness to listen that we can navigate the challenges of our times and forge a more united society. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel for more summaries of popular podcasts and other more digestible forms of wisdom.